The same week I stood at the altar in a dress I'd sewn the hem on myself. My family was 40 miles away helping my stepsister load a moving truck. Not because of an emergency. Not because someone was hurt. Because my stepmother had decided that Maya's move-in weekend couldn't be rescheduled, and my wedding, the one I'd planned for 14 months, the one I'd sent invitations to 3 months in advance, was just inconveniently timed. My husband held my hand at the reception and said, "They'll regret this." I nodded and smiled for the photographer. What I didn't say was that I already knew they wouldn't. Not for a long time. And not until I stopped making it easy for them. 4 years later, my stepmother called me on a Tuesday evening, voice soft as powdered sugar, asking if I'd be willing to help my stepsister get back on her feet. She didn't know I'd already found the email. She didn't know I'd already done the math. And she definitely didn't know that I'd been waiting, not for revenge, but for the moment the truth finally had somewhere to land. Before I go further, if this story sounds familiar, if you've ever been the one who showed up while your family showed out, hit like and drop your city and time in the comments. I read every single one. I'm Claire. I'm 32, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I want to take you back 4 years to the day I learned that love without accountability isn't love. It's just convenience wearing a familiar face. I grew up in Clarksburg, West Virginia, the kind of town where the gas station closes at 9, and everyone's aunt knows your business before you do. My mother passed away when I was 11, ovarian cancer. Quick and quiet and devastating. My father, a man named Russell, remarried 3 years later. Her name was Diane. She had one daughter from her first marriage, Maya. 2 years younger than me. Blonde where I was. Dark. Loud where I was quiet. The kind of girl who walked into a room and rearranged it without asking. My father loved Diane. I believe that. I also believe that when you're a grieving man who finally feels warm again, you stop noticing the temperature dropping somewhere else in the house. I wasn't invisible to my father. I was just lower on the list than I used to be. Maya needed new cleats for soccer. Maya's science fair project needed supplies. Maya's tutor was coming Thursday, so could I please keep it down? I learned early to keep it down. I carried a 3.9 GPA through high school and worked weekend shifts at the Dairy Queen on Route 11, so I wouldn't have to ask for spending money. I got a partial scholarship to University of Tennessee. When I called my father with the news, he said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart," and then asked if I'd seen where Diane put his reading glasses. I taped my acceptance letter to my bedroom wall. By the next morning, Diane had moved it to the corkboard in the hallway, behind a photo of Maya at her dance recital. There were 6 photos of Maya on that corkboard. I counted. Mine was behind all of them. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it us'd. I told myself a lot of things that kept me functional and kept the peace and kept me from looking too directly at what was happening. I graduated from UT in May 4 years later with a degree in nursing. My father and Diane attended. Maya did not. She was at a friend's lake house that weekend. She sent a text with a balloon emoji. My father took a photo of me in my cap and gown. Diane posted it on Facebook with the caption, "So proud of our girl." I was the only nurse in that photo, but somehow I still felt like a caption. I moved back to Tennessee after a residency in Chattanooga. Met my husband Daniel at a friend's birthday party. He's a structural engineer. Steady, methodical, the kind of man who reads the fine print before he signs anything. The first person who ever looked at me and said, "You do that thing where you apologize before you even ask a question. You know that, right?" I laughed. Then I thought about it for 3 days straight. We got engaged in October. By March, I had a venue, a florist, a caterer, and invitations printed on cream cardstock with gold lettering. I mailed one to my father and Diane in February, 7 months before the wedding. I called 2 weeks later to confirm they'd received it. Diane answered, "Of course we got it, honey. September 14th. We've already got it on the calendar." I also sent one to Maya, who had moved to Charleston, South Carolina by then. She texted back a string of heart emojis. "I'll be there," she wrote. "I already know what I'm wearing." September 14th arrived. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon, a small venue outside Nashville, white lights strung through oak trees, 40 guests, a string quartet that played a song my mother used to hum in the kitchen. I walked down the aisle with my father's brother, my Uncle Gene, because my father had offered and then 2 weeks before the wedding told me he had a bad back that week and didn't know if he could manage the walk. He managed to load a moving truck 40 miles away just fine. I found out from my cousin Bethany, who saw the photos on Diane's Facebook page before Diane thought to make her account private. There they were. My father in jeans and a Henley. Diane in a baseball cap. Maya grinning in front of a U-Haul. Keys dangling from her fingers. Time-stamped September 14th at 2:17 in the afternoon, 47 minutes before my ceremony began. The caption read, "Big day for our girl, new chapter begins." I was someone's big day too. Nobody posted about it. Daniel held me that night in our hotel room, while I stared at the ceiling. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Nothing yet." That was the beginning of yet. 1 year into our marriage, my phone rang on a Wednesday evening. Diane's voice, warm and practiced as a recorded message. "Claire, honey. I hate to even bring this up, but Maya's having a hard time adjusting. The new city, the job search, you know how it is. We were wondering if you could help her out a little while she gets settled. Just temporarily. Just until she's on her feet." I looked at Daniel across the kitchen table. He looked back. "How much?" I asked. $700 a month? Just for rent and groceries. You know she doesn't ask for much. I want you to understand something about that moment. I knew, even then, that I should have said no, but I also want you to understand what it feels like to have spent your entire life being told, in 100 small, quiet ways, that you matter less. You don't say no easily. You say yes because yes is the only word that ever made the temperature in that house go up even 1 degree. I set up the transfer. $700, first of every month, sent to Maya's account like clockwork. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself a lot of things I didn't quite believe. 18 months in, Diane called again. Same Wednesday timing. Same soft voice. "Maya's enrolled in a design program now. The tuition is just a little more than she expected. Could you add $300 to the monthly? Just until the financial aid comes through. $1,000 a month." I was 30 years old. Daniel and I were saving for a house. I said yes. I never saw the financial aid paperwork. I never asked. That was my mistake, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't stupidity. It was the same calculation I've been making my whole life. If I ask too many questions, I become the difficult one. If I push back, I become the one who doesn't care about family. I had spent 20 years being trained not to ask, and $1,000 a month wasn't enough pain to override 20 years of conditioning. Not yet. 2.5 years in, Daniel and I were sitting at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with our mortgage application spread across it. 2 cups of cold coffee, and a calculator that wasn't making us happy. He was going through our accounts the way he goes through everything, methodically, quietly, the way a man reads a blueprint. He looked up. "Claire, you've sent $42,000 to Maya's account in the past 3.5 years. I knew the number. I just never said it out loud." He wasn't angry. Daniel doesn't do angry the way other people do. He does precise. He said slowly, "Do you know if she's still in the design program?" I realized I didn't. Maya and I barely spoke. Diane gave me updates. I had been funding a life I'd never actually seen. That night I pulled up the University of South Carolina's website and looked up the design program Maya had supposedly enrolled in. Then I looked up the enrollment confirmation email Diane had forwarded me 2 years earlier. The program name was slightly different. Small detail. Might have meant nothing. But Daniel was already typing. He found it in 40 minutes. A tuition refund notice that had been forwarded to a family email account I still had access to from years ago, back when my father set up a shared account for family travel bookings and never changed the password. The refund was dated 19 months ago. Reason: student withdrawal. Student name: Maya Calloway. Maya had dropped out 19 months ago. I had sent 19 months of tuition assistance, $1,000 a month, to a program she was no longer enrolled in. I sat at that table for a long time. Daniel closed the laptop and didn't say anything. He's good at knowing when words make it worse. I did the math. $42,000 over 3.5 years. Sent for rent, groceries, tuition. Except the tuition portion had been going somewhere else for 19 months. I didn't know exactly where, but I knew it hadn't been going where I was told. I didn't call Diane that night. I didn't call anyone. I put on my running shoes and walked for an hour through our neighborhood while the streetlights buzzed on one by one. I passed the park where Daniel and I had eaten takeout on our first real date. I passed the elementary school 2 blocks from the house we were trying to buy. I walked until the anger moved from my chest to somewhere quieter, somewhere I could work with. When I came back, Daniel had printed the refund notice and placed it on the kitchen counter with a sticky note that said, "Whenever you're ready." I was ready, but I needed more than one document. I called my Aunt Carol 2 days later, my father's older sister. She's 64, retired schoolteacher, lives in Wheeling, the kind of woman who keeps receipts for emotional reasons as well as financial ones. She and I had stayed close after my mother died, birthday calls, Christmas cards, the occasional visit. She was the one who had cornered my father at his wedding to Diane and told him quietly that he needed to remember he had 2 daughters now. He had thanked her politely and then continued forgetting. Aunt Carol picked up on the second ring. When I told her what I'd found, the silence on the other end was the kind that tells you the person already knew something was wrong. They just didn't have the specific shape of it yet. She said, "Claire, I need to tell you something. Diane called me in January asking if I'd contribute to a fund for Maya. Said Maya was struggling financially and that you were already helping, but it wasn't quite enough." I asked Diane directly, "Is Maya still in school?" And Diane said yes, absolutely, she's doing beautifully. January was 6 months ago. Maya had withdrawn 19 months before that. "There's something else," Aunt Carol said carefully. "She told me, and I'm going to say this exactly the way she said it, that you hadn't been very present for the family since your wedding, that you'd kind of pulled away and become focused on your own life." I closed my eyes. "She told me you missed your father's birthday dinner last March." "I was working a night shift that weekend," I said. "I sent a card and called him the next morning." "I know that, sweetheart. I know," she exhaled. "I think she's been managing a story about you for a while." That phrase settled into me like cold water. "I know one more thing," Aunt Carol said. "Your father's been asking Diane for updates about you for months. She's been telling him you prefer space. His words when he called me last month were, 'I don't want to push Claire if she needs distance.' He thinks you've been pulling away from him by choice." I thought about all the calls I'd made to my father that went to voicemail, all the texts that got one-line responses. I had assumed he was busy. I had assumed he was just his usual quiet self. I hadn't considered that someone might be standing between us, curating what he heard. I thanked Aunt Carol and sat with the phone in my lap for a long time. Then I did what Daniel calls my audit mode. I got a notebook, sat at the kitchen table and wrote it all out. Every transfer, every stated purpose, every date. Then a second column, what I could verify. The rent I'd assumed was covering, unverifiable. The groceries, unverifiable. The groceries, unverifiable. The tuition, verifiably no longer applicable for 19 months. $42,000 with one confirmed gap wide enough to drive a truck through. Daniel reviewed it and said it reads like a financial disclosure. Good, I put it in a folder. Then I did something practical. I called my bank and stopped the automatic transfer. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just stopped it. Quietly, on a Thursday morning, with my coffee still hot. The transfer that had been leaving my account on the 1st of every month for 3.5 years simply didn't go out that month. 3 days later, Diane called. The voice was different this time. Still controlled, but the warmth was thinner, like paint over a surface that isn't quite dry. Honey, the transfer didn't come through this month. Is everything okay with your account? My account is fine, I said. A pause. Oh, did you forget to reset it after the bank update? I didn't forget anything, I said. I canceled it. The silence that followed was 4 full seconds. I counted. Claire. Her voice dropped one careful degree. Maya is really depending on that support right now. She's in a transitional period. I kept my voice level. I practiced this with Daniel the night before. Not the words exactly, just the breathing. Mom, I have a quick question. What program is Maya currently enrolled in at USC? Another pause. The design program. You know that. I have a refund notice from USC dated 19 months ago, showing Maya withdrew from that program. Is there a different program she's in now? The silence this time was longer. When Diane spoke again, her voice had gone from warm to careful to something I'd never heard from her before. Brittle. That is a private matter between Maya and this family. I am this family, I said quietly. And I've been sending $1,000 a month for 3.5 years, based on information I'm now finding may not have been accurate. I'd like to understand where that money went. Claire, I don't appreciate the implication. After everything we've done to support you over the years, to treat you like our own daughter. And there it was, the script. Every time I pushed, there was a pivot to what they'd given me, to gratitude, to the idea that asking a question was an act of ingratitude. I had heard variations of this sentence my entire life. I have to go, I said. We can talk when you're ready to answer the question. I hung up. My hands were steady. I'd expected them to shake. I sat on the edge of our bed and thought about my wedding day, about the white lights and the oak trees and the song from my mother's kitchen and Uncle Gene, who walked me down the aisle with his jaw set and his hand firm because he knew I needed someone's hand to be firm. About the 40 guests who clapped, and the string quartet and Daniel's face when I came around the corner. And about the U-Haul photo. The baseball cap. The caption that said, "Big day for our girl." I had been someone's big day too. I just hadn't been theirs. The dinner was Diane's idea. She texted me 2 weeks after our phone call, warm again, reset, like a thermostat that had cycled back around. She said she wanted to clear the air, said it would be good to have everyone together, said my father was asking about me and it would mean a lot to him. She did not mention the question I'd asked about the money. I showed Daniel the text. He read it twice, set down his coffee mug and said, "How many people do you think will be there?" I said, "That depends on what she's planning." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to go. I've got my folder." The drive to Clarksburg was 4 hours on a Saturday morning. Daniel drove. My folder sat in my bag on the back seat. 3 documents, the refund notice, the transfer history printed from my bank, and a timeline I'd written in 2 clean columns on a single sheet of paper. I wasn't going to perform anything. I was going to answer whatever question got asked, with whatever document answered it best. When we turned onto my father's street, I counted cars. 11. Spilling into the neighbor's driveway. Through the front window I could see movement, a crowd, Diane's book club friends, faces from the neighborhood, people from the church they attended. Daniel looked at me. "That's not a quiet dinner." "No," I said. "It's a production." I picked up my bag, felt the weight of the folder through the leather, and got out of the car. Diane opened the front door before we reached the porch, arms wide, eyes already glistening, the full performance. "Claire, you're here! Everyone, she's here!" Inside, the dining table had been extended into the living room. Casseroles, sweet tea, a handmade banner above the fireplace in blue and yellow. Family is everything. My father stood near the kitchen doorway drying a dish towel he wasn't using. He looked at me the way he'd been looking at me for 20 years, like he wanted to say something and kept misplacing the words. Maya sat at the far end of the table next to a man I recognized from her Instagram, a boyfriend named Cole. She smiled when she saw me. It didn't quite reach her eyes. I sat down. The dinner was warm and loud and almost felt like something real. Diane's friend Patrice told a story about a cruise. Someone passed cornbread. My father asked Daniel about his work with the careful interest of a man who has been told to ask questions. Then, between the cobbler and the coffee, Diane stood up. She tapped her glass. The room quieted. I want to say something about family, she began. About what it means to show up for each other even when it's hard. She smiled at me. Most of you know my Claire. She's a nurse in Nashville, and she has worked so hard to build a beautiful life. She bought a home last year. She and Daniel are just thriving. A few people murmured. Someone said, "That's wonderful." And because the Calloway family believes in lifting each other up, Diane continued. Claire has been so generous in supporting Maya through her transition, and we're hoping that generosity can continue a little longer while Maya gets established in her new chapter. She looked at me with that practiced, airtight smile. Maya dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Cole nodded like a man at a board meeting. I had not agreed to any new support. I had not been asked. I had not been consulted. But the room didn't know that. They had been told a version of me, and this was the version that had been handed to them. The generous stepsister, the capable one, the one who could and therefore should. Diane looked at me. Honey, did you want to say a few words? 18 faces turned toward me. The room was quiet except for the refrigerator hum and the tick of the clock above the stove. I reached into my bag. I pulled out the folder and set it on the table in front of me. I didn't open it yet. Before I say anything, I said, and my voice was steady, the way it gets when I've been breathing correctly, I want to share something with everyone here. Diane's smile stayed on her face, but it stopped moving. For the past 3.5 years, I have been sending $1,000 a month to my stepsister. I was told it was for rent, groceries, and tuition at the University of South Carolina. I opened the folder and pulled out the first page. This is a refund notice from USC dated 19 months ago. It shows that my stepsister withdrew from the program she was enrolled in. I was not told about this. The transfers continued for 19 more months after this date. I slid the page toward my father's brother, Uncle Gene, who was seated closest to me. He put on his reading glasses and looked at it without a word. That's $42,000 over 3.5 years, I continued. I'm not here to accuse anyone of a specific intent. I'm here because this room was just told that I'm happy to continue providing support, and that is not accurate. I was not asked. I did not agree. And before anyone makes a decision about what I owe my family, I'd like them to see what I've already given. I placed the second sheet on the table. The transfer history, clean columns, dates and amounts going back 42 months. Then the timeline, stated purpose on one side, verified status on the other. I printed these for anyone who would like to look at them. I sat down. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's chair shift. My father's friend Harold was the first to speak. He looked at Diane across the table. Diane, did you know the girl had withdrawn from school? Diane's hands were flat on the tablecloth. This is a family matter. Uncle Gene set the refund notice down. He looked at it for another moment. Then he looked up. When did you find out Maya had withdrawn? Claire is blowing this out of proportion. Diane's voice had thinned. Maya has been going through an incredibly difficult. Diane, Uncle Gene's voice was quiet, but it had the weight of something much heavier. My brother has been calling me for months saying Claire seems distant, that she doesn't return his calls, that she needs space. He lowered his chin. Is that what she told you? That she needed space? Diane opened her mouth and closed it. My father still hadn't moved from the kitchen doorway, but he was looking at me now, not at the floor. At me. Aunt Carol, who I hadn't known would be there, who had driven 3 hours without telling me, stood up from the far end of the table. I want to say something. Her voice was clear and deliberate, the voice of a woman who spent 30 years managing 6th graders and has no fear of a crowded room. 6 months ago, Diane called me asking for a contribution to help Maya. She told me Maya was still enrolled in school and thriving. She told me Claire had been providing support, but that Claire had also become a bit withdrawn from the family since the wedding. She pressed her lips together. That was not true on either count. I know because I talked to Claire. And because, like Claire, I now have a copy of that refund notice. She reached into her purse and placed a second printed copy on the table. Daniel had emailed it to her the night before. I had asked him to. Two of the book club friends exchanged a glance. One of them picked up her tea and set it down again without drinking. Patrice, who had told the cruise story, looked at Diane with the careful expression of someone reassessing a long friendship. Maya had not moved. She was staring at the transfer history sheet. Her boyfriend had leaned away from her slightly in his chair. Whatever she was feeling, she was doing the math quietly. Diane turned to my father. Russell, tell them. Tell them this is being taken out of context. My father set down the dish towel he'd been holding for the past 20 minutes. He looked at Diane. Then he looked at me. Then, for the first time in a very long time, he didn't do the thing I expected him to do. He didn't look away. He said quietly, Diane, don't. 2 words. The first time in my adult life I had heard my father use his voice to stop something instead of allow it. The room held. Then my father walked across the living room and pulled out the empty chair next to me. He sat down. He didn't say anything else. He just sat there, next to me, in front of everyone, which was a sentence all by itself. Diane looked at the room. The room looked back. She had no script for this. The tears she was reaching for weren't coming. The pivot wasn't landing. The family she had arranged like furniture to hold a particular shape had just rearranged itself. I wasn't finished. I reached into my folder one more time and pulled out an index card. 5 sentences. I'd written them at the kitchen table the night before with Daniel reading over my shoulder. I read them evenly, no performance. The monthly transfers have been cancelled. They were stopped last month and will not resume. I have removed Maya's account from my recurring payments. Going forward, if there is a genuine need in this family, I am open to a conversation that involves honesty and documentation, not assumptions made on my behalf in front of an audience. And I need everyone in this room to know that I have not been distant from this family. I have been managed away from it. I folded the card and put it in my pocket. Carol nodded once. Harold was shaking his head slowly. Patrice had put on her jacket. Uncle Jean stood up and rested his hand on my father's shoulder. That's enough for tonight, he said. Not to me. To the room. Diane sat alone at the head of the table beneath the banner that said, Family is everything, and the room quietly, steadily, stopped being hers. 2 of the book club friends left without finishing their cobbler. Harold shook my father's hand on the way out. Patrice stopped beside me in the hallway and said, I had no idea, hon. I'm sorry. I believed what I was told. That was the thing, wasn't it? Everyone had believed what they were told. That was the whole architecture of it. Donna, in a different family, had done the same thing my stepmother had done, and would keep doing until the documents were on the table and the room could see. Maya came to the driveway before Daniel and I left. She looked smaller than she had inside. No performance, no audience. Just a 29-year-old woman standing in a driveway with her arms wrapped around herself. She said, I didn't know she was still taking your money after I left school. I waited. I thought the transfers stopped, she said. She told me you'd decided to cut me off, that you'd always kind of resented me. So she told you I stopped, and she told me you still needed it. Maya pressed her lips together and kept the difference. I let that sit between us. I don't hate you, I said. But I also can't tell you what to do with this. That's yours to figure out. She nodded. She didn't try to hug me. I appreciated that. I got in the car. Daniel put it in reverse. In the rearview mirror, my father was standing on the porch. He raised one hand. Not a wave exactly. Something quieter than that. I raised mine back. He called me the following Tuesday. Not through Diane. His number, his voice, 7 in the evening. We talked for 11 minutes. He told me about a truck he'd been helping Uncle Jean restore in the garage. I told him about a patient I'd had that week, who'd learned to walk again after a bad fall. The look on her face when she made it to the end of the hallway. He listened. He asked questions. Real ones. Before he hung up, he said, I should have paid closer attention. I know that. I know you do, I said. That was enough for now. Enough to start. 3 weeks after the dinner, Diane's social media went quiet. The carefully curated albums, the family photos, the posts that had painted a particular picture of a particular family, they stopped. Her profile picture disappeared. Whatever version of the story she had been maintaining for an audience, she let go of it. Or maybe she just ran out of audience. Maya texted me 5 weeks later. 4 words. I started seeing someone. I assumed she meant a therapist, not a boyfriend. I wrote back, that's good. Short, honest, not cold. I'm not ready to rebuild that relationship yet. And she hadn't earned the right to rush me. But the door isn't locked. It's just not wide open. Daniel and I closed on our house 6 weeks after the dinner. A 3-bedroom in East Nashville, a backyard with 1 oak tree, a front porch with 2 chairs. The day we got the keys, I stood in the empty living room for a long time. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway watching me. He said, "What are you thinking?" I said, "I'm thinking nobody else's name is on this." He smiled. "That's the whole point," he said. I kept the folder. Not in some visible place. Not on a shelf as a monument to anything. In a filing cabinet with the other documents that matter, the mortgage paperwork, our insurance, the lease we saved from our first apartment. It belongs with the things that tell the truth about how we built our life, carefully, together, with receipts. $1,000 a month now stays in our account. It sounds simple when I say it that way, but what it actually is harder to name. It's the sound of my own judgment, trusted. It's the feeling of asking where my money is going and expecting an honest answer. It took me 32 years to understand that those are not unreasonable things to expect. People sometimes ask about the house. They see the photos on our Instagram, the oak tree, the porch chairs, the Sunday morning light coming through the kitchen window, and they assume that's the point. It's not. I didn't buy a house to make a statement. I bought it because Daniel and I built something together and we wanted a place that reflected what we'd actually built. But I'll tell you the moment that mattered more than any of it. Last Christmas, my father drove 4 hours to Nashville. First time he'd come without Diane. First time he'd come anywhere for just me. We sat on the front porch in the cold with coffee and blankets and watched the street stay quiet. He told me about my mother, things I'd forgotten or maybe never known. The way she hummed in the kitchen, the way she organized her bookshelves by color instead of author. The way she had called him out when he was wrong, and he'd always respected her for it. I held my coffee with both hands and listened. Before he left, he stood at the car door and said, "I spent a long time letting the wrong things stay easy." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Some sentences don't need a paragraph around them. I said, "Tuesday nights work for me, if they work for you." He said, "Tuesdays work." He called the next Tuesday, and the one after. The calls are getting longer. I used to think strength was absorbing, taking what people gave you and finding a way to keep standing. And there is a kind of strength in that. I don't want to dismiss it. I used that strength for 20 years, and it kept me upright. But there is another kind. The kind where you put the documents on the table and let the truth do its own talking. The kind where you stop managing other people's comfort with your silence. The kind where you sit in a room full of people who have been told a story about you, and you say, "Actually, let me show you the other version." I earned that kind the hard way. But I did earn it. Somewhere right now, someone is listening to this while they're folding laundry or stuck in traffic or lying in bed at midnight staring at the ceiling, and they have been saying yes for so long it doesn't even feel like a choice anymore. They have been funding something with their own money, and their own quiet, and their own unasked questions. And somewhere in them, they know something is wrong. They just haven't found the shape of it yet. If that's you, here's what I want you to know. You are allowed to ask where your money goes. You are allowed to expect a direct answer. Loving your family doesn't mean you have to finance a lie. Saying no is not an act of abandonment. It is an act of clarity, and sometimes clarity is the most loving thing you can bring into a room. The people who call you selfish for asking an honest question are usually the ones with the most to lose from an honest answer. I have a folder in a filing cabinet. I have a house with an oak tree. I have a husband who reads bank statements the way other people read novels and has never once told me how to feel. I have a father who calls on Tuesdays and is learning to make the call himself. I have an Aunt Carol who drove 3 hours and brought a printed copy without being asked. And I have my name back, the real one, not the one that was handed around that dinner table in a version of me I didn't recognize. The one I built myself, paycheck by paycheck, 12-hour shift by 12-hour shift, question by honest question. My wedding invitation is in a box in the closet. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, September 14th. I found it when we were unpacking after the move. I held it for a minute, standing in the middle of boxes and bubble wrap and the whole beautiful mess of a life we were building. Then I put it back. Not to carry the weight of it. To remember the distance I've traveled since the day I sat alone with flowers in my hand and smiled for a photographer, while 40 miles away someone posted a caption about their girl's big day. That day used to be the saddest thing I owned. Now it's just a chapter. And the chapter ends differently than they planned. If any part of this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you've ever had to draw a line with someone you love, even when it cost you something, tell me. I read every one. Hit like if this one made you think, and there's another story in the description if you're not ready to stop. Same kind of truth. Different family, a twist you won't see coming. Take care of yourselves. Your name belongs to you.